Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning to you. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. Thank you. I better turn off my phone. It's starting to beep at me again. And Jake, how are you? No, didn't mean to call you out in case you're doing something else, Jake, but I'm glad you're here. And hopefully Bart will join us if his if his meetings allow for it. So, Professor, I'm going to try to do something different today. I don't think we've ever done something quite like this. I'm going to throw out a bunch of contemporary things, and not even a bunch, just kind of the setting, and then I'd like you to interrupt me whenever you wish about history or how, hey, we've done that before, or we might want to think about, or uh, you know because the topic in foreign entanglements, treaties, allies, we had a really nice conversation on this of July of 2022, and we
Hmm.
talked about it was fairly recently after the invasion of Ukraine, and we talked about this founding of our country in an ideological nation state, and we talked about the Mexican War, we talked about the Spanish War, talked about the Civil War a little bit, we talked about all sorts of stuff on how we should be entangled or not based off, if my memory is right, you said there's like two things: it should be in our interest or our principles, and it should be in our interest, or you can do it.
Yep, that sounds like me. I don't
Yeah,
remember
and so
what I said, but I always say the same thing.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. It was nice. And so if
yeah.
anyone wants to know that, they should go back to and because it's really worth listening to. It was a good conversation. Listen to the three-fourths of it this morning. What I'd like to think about today is a kind of a guiding structure or a philosophical place, a foundation, and where somebody, if they were running for Congress or a governor or a president, they could hang their hat on it. And the reason I'm a Democrat or a Republican is I believe in these principles. Because right now it seems, and there's no doubt, I'm going off contemporary issues to hear former President Trump, what he said, and who knows if he did or not, but what he says he said is encouraging Putin to attack allies if they're not paying their full share. My sense of history on that one point, whether he said it or not, there are people that believe that. Um, it misunderstands the whole purpose of NATO. And so I'm confused on why it's not 100% of Republicans saying, no, sorry, Mr. Former President, stop it. It should be 100% of Republicans, not like 50-50 or 70, because it's so alien to me. I don't even understand it. And so then I look at some of my Democratic friends' posts who are writing Republican things. They're saying it's important to stand up for freedom and democracy and allow countries who don't tolerate authoritarians. This is why we must support Ukraine. And I'm going, well, my gosh, that sounds like a Republican. It seems like everything is switched. And so I don't mean to just lay on the former president. Actually, I do, but not at the purpose of this. We're talking to a historian. Can you tell me, in general terms, how we should treat Ukraine and Israel? And well, wait, we got the border. Well, wait, we can't support those things until we protect our own country. Well, wait, we can't afford any of this. We've got this national debt. So, as I said, I wanted to throw out a bunch of stuff for you to kind of give some historical guideposts, some things we should all think about as Americans, and whether it's national health care, because all our European allies seem to have that, probably better than we do for the lower middle, well, not lower, but for lower middle income folks that struggle because we don't have enough money to give health care to lower middle income. Everybody else is probably okay. If you're rich, you're okay. If you're poor, you're okay. But if you're lower middle, it's a heck. I pay an enormous amount for our health care for our family. It's
Hmm.
too enormous. It's causing quality of life and standard of living issues with my family because I'm self-employed and we spend way too much on that.
Hmm.
Well, wait, why am I in favor of funding Ukraine? And also, why do I'm willing to build a border wall? I can't do it all. Why are we mortgaging our children's debt? Anyways, so you can tell I'm sending a bunch of stuff out at you because I think we should talk about all these issues in a different way than we're currently allowing our candidates to talk about. I just don't understand why we're a mess right now. And you and I and anybody else that's willing to join us should have a different type of dialogue. Okay,
Hmm.
your turn to jump in
Yeah.
wherever you want, and then I'll
Well, I
interrupt
thought we
you.
were going to be talking about foreign policy, but in a way, it's always nice to remind ourselves that in America, the most important thing we do in foreign policy is something that has to do with domestic policy. So, in the United States, the most important thing that we do is we serve as an example that human beings can govern themselves.
Love that.
And so that's sort of point number one I try to make when it comes to foreign policy is that this is
But go,
essential.
what's the other alternative? What do you mean govern ourselves?
That we, well, I guess we can pull up the Monty Python sketch of strange women lying in ponds, distributing swords is no
Right.
basis for a system of government.
I didn't vote for you. Yeah.
Yeah, we're an autonomous collective. We're an anarcho-syndicalist commune. But at the time of our founding, we were the only example that human beings could govern themselves peacefully, and so it was seen as our most important role.
Now, there were philosophers talking about it, right? I mean, we didn't do it in isolation, and there were
Sure.
countries kind of moving in a similar path, but we planted our flag first.
Yeah,
Is
and
that
it's still important because even today, dictatorships around the world will point to um, America and when things go awry here and say, "See, it doesn't work. They can't do it. We have to have a strong man. We have to have a dictator in order to keep our subways clean or our prices low in supermarkets
or
in our capital
or,
city."
or a school shooting or
Or a
a
school shooting, yeah. So we need to we have to get rid of our freedoms and our liberties and give ourselves over to a national daddy, national king, someone who is over us, who will govern us, and the interconnectedness because we are a representative form of government, for a lot of people, they do tend to connect issues in foreign policy and domestic policy. So they'll say, for instance, we can't send money to Ukraine because we are in debt, and we should be taking care of this thing that is local. Our debt crisis is a domestic crisis. And one of the things that, if you want to have a productive discussion about the costs of government, there's a guy named Byron or Brian Riedel. I can't remember if it's Byron or Brian, and I can't remember if it's Riedel or Riedel.
he'll
But
tell
he's at the
us.
Manhattan Institute. I'm sure Jake Peterson could find him, and uh, 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 he puts out a chart book every year with an update on the federal budget. But it answers most of the questions that people have about the costs of government, especially handling things like the easy answer, how much of our government, costs is foreign aid, and would cutting off foreign aid or getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse thanks, Jake just brought up the chart. And in essence, almost every assumption or assertion that people make about the debt is just completely wrong. We could fund Ukraine, and that's a rounding error compared to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Like, full stop. There is no solution to any sort of debt issue in America, and it largely these kinds of problems come because Americans don't understand big numbers. We hear a million, a billion, and a trillion, and what we hear is big number. And we really, especially when it comes to the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion, people hear 100 million and they hear, oh, that's a lot of money. Or they hear 5 billion, they're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. But you don't understand that the difference between 500 million or $100 million, ooh, that's a lot, versus like $10 billion, right? That's 10,000 million. And a trillion is 1,000 billion. So it's healthcare, it's Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security that's driving our debt. So usually it's once you get past that stage where you get somebody to acknowledge that what you're saying doesn't really make sense within the context of the federal budget. That if we cut off aid to Ukraine, for instance, it would fund Social Security for 5 minutes. Maybe, I don't know. I don't like it's or you say, well, that would mean we could mail everyone in America a check for 100th of a penny. Like, is that going to change your life? So everybody has a problem with understanding scale when it comes to these issues. So when we're talking about foreign policy decision making, some historians kind of put it into three eras. I tend to think of it as being, I don't know, 2.5 eras, which is that from the founding up until World War II ish. It really did make a lot of sense to um, uh, rest on the foundations of the founders that said no permanent entangling alliances, because we need to always be able to act unilaterally because our interests are different than every other country in the world. And then after World War II, it depends on when you think it's useful, but after World War II, it makes a lot of sense to have permanent entangling alliances because our interests are aligning with other countries that have representative forms of government. And I'm sympathetic to people who think that those entangling alliances maybe went too far, and especially when it comes to the UN. But generally speaking, it's okay with me, and I think in keeping with the spirit of what the founders wanted, which is the reason we were, in preserving unilateralism and American exceptionalism was because there were no other democracies, but now there are. So I think that maybe we should hold some of these alliances a little bit looser than the idea that they're permanent and we never revisit these issues. But I'm certainly not on board with the destroy NATO, and in fact I'd be very opposed to that, because although I do think that as certain countries slip out of being democracies, I think we should revisit maybe kicking some people out of NATO.
Yeah, but
Because
you're talking about two different countries.
yeah,
Name them.
Hungary and Turkey.
Yep. Okay. I was going Turkey and Hungary, but those are the two. So like if
Yeah,
you become an authoritarian regime, sorry, you're out.
yeah.
Yeah, but couldn't that same argument be made against the US and we're out?
What's that?
Couldn't that same argument be made against the US and we're out?
I don't
We've
think
talked a
so.
lot of shows,
You
Professor.
know,
We've a lot of shows that on maybe 30% of the conservative movement and maybe 20%, or you might say 40% of the democratic movement is authoritarian.
yeah, but I also think that a lot of countries don't understand the nature of our federal system, because as bad as our national political system is, most of our state, county, and local governments are still operating as they should.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's an
so,
excellent point to weave into this. That's
I mean,
excellent.
it's hard to understand it. Like, again, like it's not hard to understand the scale of money. It's also hard to understand the scale of countries. California is England. Like they're size wise, and if we were our own separate economy, we would be somewhere in the top 10, depending on the year.
Seventh bank, yeah, right.
Yeah. So understanding the robustness of the democratic institutions in the United States, and understanding that we are a federal system, um, I, I think we're still a long way from being called a dictatorship.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a brilliant point. Thank you. I'm so glad I asked the question and so glad you put a huge punch back into it. That's excellent. On a side note, on a similar vein, is European Union Is it becoming a federalist system eventually that might, I mean, it's about the same size population and GDP as the United States. If they ever get together, is the European Union a United States type of system, or is it a totally different beast?
I think it's a totally different beast, and I
Why?
hope it does maintain a lot of national sovereignty. In part because of the unique history of Europe. Europe in many ways is a very um, a very has a very conventional history. You have a bunch of tribes that settle in regions, and it goes family, clan, extended family, clan, tribe, nation. And so a lot of their
Sounds like the colonies, Professor.
what's that?
American colonies.
Not really, because our our colonies were multinational from the get-go, and because they were, I mean, all 13 of them were founded for a different reason, and some of them were just money-making institutions,
But there were many more that weren't included in the than 13. There was a bunch of colonies and only 13 of them
oh yeah, there
founded.
was 60 or 90, depending on how you count, what
Right.
you count as a colony. But um, yeah, you know, Europe, I worry a little bit more about nationalistic backsliding in Europe than I do in states in the United States. And in particular because um, I don't know if you remember this moment, but it was kind of in the '90s into the 2000s. There was this dream of using Europe as a counterweight to the United States in the world. In other words, that Europe should stand in opposition to the United States, and that there was going to be
I don't quite remember that. Was it
yeah,
Europe?
and there would be an alliance between Germany and France to dominate the EU, and then
Mm,
use the EU as a counterweight to the United States. And then when there were some various financial crises in member states of the EU, there was a lot of resentment towards places that were bailing them out, exercising too much control over each one. Anyway, at any rate, it's just a very different story.
so, Professor, I'm
So
interrupting a side story with another side story. I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they were listening. And I'm sorry, I was driving along and stuff, but can't remember who said it, but it was a European diplomat who's saying, "Please give us 10 years. We can't arm ourselves adequately until we need a good 10 years run up. We can't just like fund a military apparatus in a year. It's going to take us a decade." And my reaction to that is, yeah, gosh, do we really want them to be all a bunch more arms in Europe? And I guess my reason is similar to yours. Um, I don't know. I guess I don't want to pay for all their arms, but on the other hand, if they're totally independent of us and we're not leading in the world, I'm not sure their leadership will be as good as ours. So I had some reticence to that statement. Do you have any reaction to that?
just I never worry about the weapons. I worry about the culture. You
Right.
know, if Canada has nuclear weapons, I don't care. It as long um, as long as that country has a democratic culture and um, representative government is functioning and rule of law is functioning, I don't have any fear
So
about
do you think
becoming
there's
military power.
not genetically, because we've talked a lot about that in different woven in different conversations, but do you think there's some cultures, again, not genetically, just culture,
Cultural traditions, yeah.
that are, yeah, predisposed to an authoritarian bent that they
Not
like that?
necessarily an authoritarian bent, but just some of them have a history of ordering their values based on conquering people against their will. I guess
That,
conquering takes
but
care
what
of
is
it.
the greatest example of that being Great Britain?
No, not necessarily.
No, they dominated. The sun never sets on the British Empire. What do you mean? No.
Well, because even when the British Empire was spreading most of its wings, there was opposition in within England, that was largely based on the kind of um, the spreading of the ideas of Adam Smith, that what you don't want is, you don't want to control any of these things. The British Empire is just it's a much more complicated and nuanced set of imperial holdings, because it isn't just a king who's a baby saying, take this, I want it. And if the rubber production isn't high enough, kill everybody. Like, so in many cases, the British were doing things because they felt like they had to, in order to prevent the French or the Germans or the Japanese from taking the territory. And the Monroe Doctrine is a good example of that. You know, if you think about the British intervention into the Western Hemisphere, they approached us and asked for an alliance, and we said no, but they're the ones who enforced the Monroe Doctrine, and they did sometimes intervene into the, economies of Latin American countries, and they sometimes interfered with the politics, but
And now remember, Professor, I have a political science degree, and law doesn't help in this, but my political science degree should mean something. Remind viewers like me about the Monroe Doctrine in case they don't listen to other shows.
oh, okay. Uh, After the War of 1812, Latin American countries were declaring their independence largely in the 1820s. And the question for the United States and Britain is, what do we do about it? And there were enough people in Britain who were, as I said, kind of at least thinking along these lines of, maybe we don't want to just conquer these countries, because they had the example of the United States where they're saying, we're actually learning that two countries can live at peace with one another, and then both countries benefit from that peace. So they're learning from this Britain's learning from this relationship with the United States, that maybe it's okay that America is an independent country, because we actually do better financially with the United States being an independent country, because now we don't have to pay for its defense, and we can just do business with them, and somehow it's making us money. We are not sure how, don't understand fully how markets work, but at least it's an experiment. And so they approach the United States and say, hey, we'd like to have an alliance with you over preventing your other European countries from coming back and recolonizing all of these new democracies in Latin America. And we say, thank you, but no. And we issue essentially separate policy documents. So it's not an alliance, but we issue our statement that's almost the same as theirs, and then because we don't have a navy at the time, the British end up enforcing the Monroe Doctrine.
Oh, yeah, you've taught me something, which is nice. You always teach me something, but
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the ability until, depends on, I mean, 1880, 1890s, really. We don't have any ability to, uh, uh, enforce the Monroe Doctrine. So the British do. And but again, through the 19th century, Britain, even though they have a monarchy, they have a parliament. They have people. They have a political opposition who, no matter what the country is doing, there are people in parliament saying we shouldn't be doing this, and thus their decision making is always moderated by their representative government at home. And I say moderated, not perfected, or but certainly, at least in the international scene, at least no matter what policy they're pursuing, there's somebody back in England saying we shouldn't be doing this, and it tends to moderate their positions. So Anyway, that's your quick uh, history of the 19th century. Did I answer the
Yeah,
question? Did you want more?
I'm taking you down two side paths now, so it's a little convoluted. You're the big picture. You were talking about three and a half,
Uh,
uh,
oh,
and
okay. So, post World War II, it's an entirely different uh, game. And I'd say the best foreign policy, and if I were to wave my magic wand and say, what should American policymakers be doing? I would say pull up Eisenhower's NSC 162/2, which I'm sure Jake can Google right now. But it is essentially a restatement of ideals and interests when you factor in domestic policy and alliances. And that's Eisenhower's um, you know, reframing of Cold War policy.
is it
But
possible I've not only not read that, but never heard of that?
I like it because it says, how do we do this thing without losing the American way of life? And that's something that I don't think a lot of policymakers really take into account when they're being reactionary. Eisenhower had a long enough term view of American foreign policy that he would always stop and say, like, all right, no matter what we do, let's first remember that we have to preserve the American way of life. And if any policy that we pursue undermines, representative government at home, or if we try to react to what another country is doing, then we've already lost the thing we're supposed to be fighting for.
So, but my big convoluted question at the beginning, throwing a bunch of different stuff at you: Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, national debt, healthcare. I mean, just how do our border and immigration? How do we handle all this stuff, and how do we prioritize it? And it seems like the political parties have switched. You're saying your short answer is just read Eisenhower's, and
That and his farewell address. I mean, because in his farewell address, he says, "How do you handle the mix between foreign policy and domestic policy?" And how do we? And he says that you just have to recognize that we live in a world of limits and balance, and the role of a statesman is to explain this to the American people. And as I say, one of the reasons why healthcare is not a market. Some parts of healthcare are a market. I'm wearing eyeglasses. That can be a market. It
dentist.
can. But how much money? My uncle Alan, who died at 101, and listened to the Hometown Heroes episode of him describing him getting a hole in one and at the age of 94, and him winning a bronze star for heroic action at Leyte.
This is a what? What am I supposed to listen to?
Oh, I don't know how good Jake's Googling skills are, but if you look up Alan Tootle, Bronze Star, Leyte, hole in one golf, you'll find this great interview with my Uncle Alan after he got his first hole in one at the age of 94.
Lovely. I don't think you've ever mentioned him before. This is neat.
Oh, yeah, my grandpa and his four brothers were really important to me, but in particular, two of his brothers that I grew up with, my great uncles, my Uncle Bill and my Uncle Alan, were also. I grew up next door to my Uncle Bill, and my Uncle Bill and Uncle Alan played golf together. My grandpa didn't play golf, so I had anyway, they were great people, and I loved my grandpa and my great uncles. Oh, look at that, you found it. So if you want to hear a 1 hour interview with my Uncle Alan describing his experiences in World War II and his hole in one, it's in the show notes. And it's fascinating. I mean, you can see exactly what his personality was, and I love that interview that he did. Glad it exists out there in the internet. Anyway, when he was passing away, he was 101, and we could have spent every dollar in the U.S. Treasury trying to keep him alive, and it wouldn't have done it. So we're trying to extend human life, and when people are, it's war and healthcare essentially have the same market problem, and that is you're trying not to die. uh, and you will spend any amount of money um, in order to survive. Uh, and so regular market forces just aren't at work. The same reason I always say in this podcast, like violence is different. Don't
Right.
call things that aren't violence violence. Like if you think about it, like getting sick and getting old is like an act of violence against your body. And um, so these things have to be managed differently. And I guess I would say the role of a statesman is to at least begin a conversation um, by acknowledging this reality that, um, and that's
So
why when, oh,
or
go
and
ahead.
are different. Let me
Pardon?
throw one more into the mix to see if you'd put this in that same box of being different. Listening to an author today on NPR, and now for my lefties, they're thrilled, and I'm using lefties intentionally. And for my righties, they're aghast that I listen to NPR occasionally. There was this author, I think he's from Denver, who was advocating that a pretty open border approach, more so than you would advocate. He said you can't solve that. They are going to get here. If you want to come to the United States because you like the United States, you're going to figure out a way. Now you may get kicked out. You're going to come back. It's just impossible to have a lockdown border with the United States. If you really want to be here, you're going to be here.
Well, yeah, just buy a bus ticket. I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
but
Go to Disney World.
buy it, save up enough money to fly into one of our airports and then walk outside, like,
Right.
uh,
And so would you put immigration into that quasi bucket that it's just different? People are going to do what they're going to do?
no, I don't know because if they are facing something at home, yeah, I guess I don't know. The human spirit is in some ways remarkable in what you can accomplish um, if you would like to accomplish that thing. Um, so I don't put a lot of limitations on what people can do.
Okay, I didn't mean to stump you or
Yeah,
complicate things because you're making good points here on after World War II.
but
Uh,
I guess the where I see the I'll do anything in order to make this thing happen is more about that person leaving their previous country, and the hardships they will endure.
in
Um,
order to find something better for themselves.
yeah,
Where are we on this 2.5? Forgive me for being so convoluted that I've lost track now.
yeah, sorry.
3.
So the sort of half is the introduction of terrorism and weapons of mass destruction into the
Uh,
equation by non-state actors. And in this case, I just think I'm too close to the events and circumstances to sort of put a bow on it and proclaim this, that I have some sort of special knowledge on this. But I do think that with the introduction of um, um, non-state actors and the ability to use weapons of mass destruction, and also the ability of state actors to manipulate non-state actors into using weapons of mass destruction. And there are some people who think that that cyber and drones are kind of in that 2.5. It's our um, China, but behind all of this new stuff is old stuff. You know, behind if you look behind the Houthis, you're going to find some Iranians. If you look behind the TikTok and the drones and the cyber, you're going to find some Russians and some Chinese. Uh, so in a way, it reminds me almost of facing issues of piracy in the between this in the 1700s and 1800s, maybe even before that. I guess you'd say for that 300 or 400-year period, where essentially countries were doing things to each other, and other countries were deciding whether or not they would acknowledge what they knew to be true.
mhm.
Like, oh, okay, this is a pirate. It's really working on behalf of the British government. Do we go to war with them over this, or do we pretend that it's not happening. But again, that's also dealing with a bunch of countries that war is their natural state, and they're essentially always at war.
Well,
Um,
that was one of my main thrusts, and we've gone back to this several times, many times, about whether we're just a warring species and whether we're never, I mean, like, is there some ideal that every country is safe, prosperous, and free, kind of the goal of the United States and our hopefully imprint on others? And as long as they become safe, prosperous, and free, then that benefits us. But apparently, some countries don't want to be safe, prosperous, and free. They want something easy. They want they want to steal it rather
yeah,
than work.
and even if a country doesn't want to be safe, prosperous, and free, if they aren't exporting their bad ideas, we usually leave them alone. Um, the problem comes when, I mean, it's essentially the problem of not wanting to be safe, prosperous, and free means that you're going to be violent and poor, and you need an explanation for why you are violent, poor, and unsuccessful. And when you you have some sort of population that you have to say, um, well, uh, we are violent, poor, and unsuccessful, and the reason is because of Jews, or because of the United States, or it's because of your nearest neighbor. It's because of the Arabs next door, or and in other words, you have to have some reason why you're failing so badly, and if you don't want to reassess your values, that's what leads to them attacking their neighbors and people around the world. Is
Well,
they need a story to tell.
so is there a difference between individuals and subgroups of individuals and nation states, or is it all on a bell curve? And no matter how much we try to make the world a better place, there's some people that are just going to act out in elementary school or be really violent and take it out on some innocent people with a weapon, or they're going to invade some poor country, or they're going to stick it to some rich country just because it's a hoot and they might die, but they might get some riches in between dying. I mean, is it a fundamental human
Well,
character?
I mean, in a way, it works for individuals and countries that you have to forgive yourself, forgive others, realign your values, and act as if, you know. And if you would like to lead a better life as an individual, forgive yourself, forgive others, uh, realign your values, and act like put your new values into practice. If Iran wanted to be it's you think about it, like, what's the problem with Iran? Well, they uh they don't want that. China, North Korea, they don't want those things because the I mean, it's true of countries and it's true of individuals. Um, both countries and individuals have, especially in dictatorships where you have like a cult of personality at the center. Like, what you have is, somebody like a Putin. Um, uh, he doesn't want. Step one is admit that you're wrong, and the strongest bias we all have is confirmation bias. We want to be right about ourselves, even if it's self-destructive. Um, that's how. Yeah, that's how we act as human beings, and um, yeah, the remarkable thing about human beings, though, is that we don't have to do that. You can actually, make a different decision and change the trajectory of your own life. And if you're a dictator, you can just decide to not be anymore.
So,
um,
so assuming we're a fairly just conglomeration of individuals in the United States that try to do what you're saying, forgive ourselves and try to be better and um, try to be prosperous, but in a just way. We're trying to be a good country, but all of a sudden we're hanging out someday and all our chips are stolen from China because they invade Taiwan, and we go, well, wait, we weren't ready to spend our time and treasure on this. We were going to a birthday party. What do you mean? What are you what are you doing? And we have to act. It seems like we always have to be reactionary, even if we're not trying to be imperialist anymore, are we? I mean, there's not little territories all over the world that have a U.S. flag on it, are there? I know we have bases all around the world, but we're really not trying to rule the world, are we? Or are we?
No. Um,
We're
and
expanding NATO, though, right up into Russia's backyard, say my
that's,
conservative friends now.
yes, but I mean, voluntary self-protection is not imperialism. Somebody who says like, "Oh, I want to be protected from this other group, and I'm willing to go through go through all this work to join this alliance," like that's not imperialism. That's I mean, I'm when I join a sports team, that's not imperialism. I wanted to be on the sports team. That's I would utterly reject any version of the word imperialism that doesn't include involuntary violence and domination, and over somebody who's a part of this
Okay, well,
involuntary.
I'll agree to that. We're just trying to live our lives here in America, and then Putin invades Ukraine, and all of a sudden, even though it's a rounding error to your point, where it's still money, it's still real money, and
Mhm.
all of a sudden we're God, expanding NATO and fighting NATO and spending money, and a lot of people are dying, and we didn't want any of this, but all of a sudden we're sending F-16s over there. We're minding our own business, and a bunch of terrorists from Gaza go into Israel and murder people. Well, wait, now we're spending a bunch of money over there. Same thing with Taiwan if that happens. But we're still having a bunch of people who want to come to America, and gosh, we need to build a higher, thicker, deeper wall or something, or more technology. So, we just read Eisenhower. Now I'm kind of trying to draw a conclusion. Do we just read Eisenhower, and that will give us some foundations for us to argue, or there's some other things that we should ponder as citizens?
I mean, the other thing I always say to ponder is that always remember that other countries don't share our values. And so we have to react to what they do, not what we believe they should do, or what we think how they should, because we'll sit around and ask ourselves, why are they doing this? And why can't they, blah, blah, blah,
Well,
and
but is our value pluralism? Is that our number one value, or is there other values that are equal to that?
well, hopefully our leaders understand that prosperity comes from peace, uh, and therefore peace is a positive good in the world, not something that is a sign of weakness. And our enemies just flatly reject that idea. So we need to understand that we cannot appeal to them the way that, in a way that would appeal to us. Like, guy with machete kicking down your door, we could say, why do you value murdering me? What's wrong? But he doesn't value that. So he doesn't understand that. There's no point in talking to him about it. In a way, we need to recognize that there are a lot of countries on Earth that are essentially no different than they were in the 12th century in terms of how they order their values. Um, and so
So
there's really no point in, you must use violence. I
now,
mean, you must kill them. They have to die.
we haven't talked about the other four major continents that have populations, four or five: Africa, South America, Asia. Much in this, we've kind of had a Western civilization flair to which kind of makes sense because that's where we are, right? That's our historical basis. But are those other continents? Are they getting better or worse as far as this? Since in the last 50, 75 years, our lifetimes and our parents' lifetimes are we becoming more safe, prosperous, and free? And is that expanding, or are we going back to more root causes that are in all of us and willing to use violence for our own desires.
Wow, as if summarizing a continent isn't hard enough when you combine two of them. So if I were to, yeah, that's a good question, right? This is the point of this podcast. Right?
Right.
My dad's best friend used to call it "stump the chump." The I guess the encouraging thing is that in most of these developing areas, we've seen double-digit economic growth. And what you hope is that someone, in a way, you kind of hope that what's going on in Asia and in Africa today is similar to what was going on in England and the United States in the 19th century, where people are saying, you got some people saying we should absolutely keep doubling down with, racism and and the old ways. And then there are some people who are hopefully raising their hands saying, where's this wealth coming from? Like, what do we want out of life? And when you have a growing economy, you also have within it kind of the incentive of economic stability for each individual so that they can say, like, I don't want to lose what I have. And so, yeah, I understand you want to drag me into another, war with the tribe next door, but I don't want to do that. Uh, um, and eventually, rich people will have enough influence within corrupt governments to stop wars, which is kind
No,
of
you don't totally mean that. You might mean it may get better, but it's
well, in any growing economy, you're going to have some level of wealth that is spreading broadly. Uh, it's going to have an effect on every economic strata. But you will also, anytime you have economic growth, you will have these large concentrations of wealth among a new class that were not the people in power 20 and 30 years ago. And you have this sort of alliance between the super rich and the people of the country against um, people who want to drag you into wars.
hmm.
Um,
That
which is
you're
the opposite, I guess, of how most people think of it, because I know that people think that like profiteers drag us into wars, in the arms industry. But it's the economy as it grows is bigger than just the arms industry, so, and again, I'm talking about long-term things. I'm talking about a trend that takes place over 150 years. So you ask me big questions.
well,
I'm
that's
trying
only
to
true in my
summarize
life.
two continents, two continents in 150 years.
Well, that's only
That's
true
how I
in
would
my
answer.
lifetime, so that doesn't intimidate me. So, would you believe that that doesn't resonate with me? Most of what you say resonates with me, but that one doesn't. I'm concerned about the oligarchs of whatever stripe that having a different interest than me in suburbia in America. Uh,
You should be. Yeah,
oh,
but there's a dip. I guess I'd say there's a difference, and that is that, like, in a country, don't think about Russia, because Russia is not growing, a profoundly growing economy. It's a falling behind economy. Um, and it takes a long time to uh, outgrow a Putin, right? I'm thinking more along the lines of like, um, well, name your various country in Central Asia or Africa. Uh,
Thailand,
what's that?
Thailand.
Yeah, there, I mean, another good example. Like we could say that I don't think we have anything to fear from Thailand. You know, there are too many rich people in Thailand making money. That even though it's a government we might still think of as being authoritarian or not ideal, um, uh,
Hmm.
that as far as the world is concerned, they might throw their economic weight around. There's probably still a lot of corruption. Maybe like, but they have gotten to the point where they have incentivized peace for themselves and for the rest of the world. Like they would recognize, Thailand would recognize, like it's not going to do us any good to um, export terrorism and invite wars with our neighbors. Um,
Okay, so you're leaning
Malaysia,
mostly
you know.
you're leaning mostly optimistic on the state of human affairs in
Yeah.
foreign affairs.
Well, I would say all of this is predicated on the United States and our allies continuing to exist.
Well,
Because
and
we have to be that beacon. We have to be that North Star that you can
we
point to.
also have to flex our muscle a little bit, don't we? Don't we have to
Yeah.
keep funding Ukraine and organizing the Europeans to help an alignment?
Yeah, but that's also like another great thing about NSC 162/2 is Eisenhower was pleading, well, actually executing, that was his policy, and he actually did it. But understand how our economy and the strength, the real strength of the American people is our culture. And what that means is that we should play to our strengths, not react to their strengths. I mean, that's why it was such a profound realignment from the NSC 68, which is we're gonna match what the Soviets are doing. We're gonna match them soldier for soldier. And Eisenhower's like, that's crazy. We don't need to do that. And I explain it to my students like rock, paper, scissors. If they bring scissors to the battlefield, that's when we bring rock. And what our real strength is our ability to bring a rock when they bring scissors, and bring scissors when they bring paper, and bring I forget whatever the last one is that I'm leaving out. But it's this boring stuff like logistics. So we're
Yeah.
not going to try to beat them at what they're good at, which is not caring if their soldiers die and
Oh, I
handing
hear
them a
about it.
rifle. You know,
Yeah.
as Eisenhower said, never forget how they clear minefields. They walk through them. Like we do what we're good at. Which is high tech. All jet Air Force, nuclear weapons. Um, so that is not a weakness of the United States. That's a military strength. Our freedom is a strength, and understanding how to wield that strength is, I think, the role of a statesman.
Lovely. I'm going to leave it there since we're at 5 till 11. I don't think we're on a huge time constraint today. It might be hard for Bart to jump in after his appointment, but Bart, if you've heard anything that you'd like to pursue, question, comment, um, anything else, please jump in. Or Jake, you've been with us most of the time. It looks like you had to disconnect for a little bit for some reason, technology or personal reason. Jake, if you have anything, you're welcome to jump in now too. Otherwise, I'm going to declare victory today in saying that this was, Professor, you've given me some enlightening things to ponder, most of which I agree, some I have some consternation about. Jake.
Well, I think this is a really fascinating conversation. I think all of our conversations are fascinating. That's why I show up every week. But I think that foreign policy is an area that, based off of online discussion, very few people know little or anything about. And particularly the MAGA faction of the Republican Party knows nothing about foreign policy because um, the now disgraced former host of Fox News, Tucker Carlson, is doing a victory tour around Russia. And he's posting all of these videos talking about how Joe Biden's Bidenflation has ruined the American economy. And it'd be so much better to live in Russia because food is so much cheaper there. And he seems to be ignoring all of the fact checkers that are like, okay, food is cheaper, but Russia's a poorer country, the average income is $10,000 a year, and the average Russian spends like 35% of their income on food, whereas in America, it's about 10%. And so I just find it interesting, this kind of shift where you have all of these Republicans who, you guys, older people who were alive during the Cold War. I was born after the Cold War. But during the Cold War, with Reagan and the Republicans, they were the hawks who said, we are going to destroy this new Russian empire of the Soviet Union. And now you have Republicans that are worshiping at the feet of Vladimir Putin and saying we need to get out of Ukraine because Ukraine is a corrupt government, blah, blah, blah. But if Reagan was alive right now, this is his perfect wet dream because we're just giving Ukraine a couple $100 billion and they are systematically dismantling the entire Russian military.
Yeah, I love that you brought that conversation up. I've tempted myself, and then answer it if you'd like to, Professor. I've had the desire to listen to that hour or 2 hour interview with Tucker versus Putin, and I haven't yet. But it seems like I should be more aware of what they're talking about and why. So, Professor, do you have a reaction to Jake's concern about the evolution of the Republican Party or whatever
Yeah,
other point?
I mean, it's just Tucker Carlson is disconnected from reality in the way that like became famous in America with certain journalists traveling to, visit Stalin and Hitler. And then, I mean, literally today, the Russian opposition leader died because he fell in the prison yard. Like 47-year-olds don't usually die from tripping. That this everything about this can be, it beggars description. I mean, I was trying to Google this while I was trying to pull a Jake while Jake was talking. 20% of Russians don't have indoor plumbing. Like, I don't know, say what you will. Like, of course, in dictatorships, they build palaces. That's you don't judge a country by the palace of its dictator. That's an absurd standard.
Professor, it's not just one nutty Carlson guy. I did see one friend that posted that it got like 5 million views within 20 minutes or something. And I assume not all those are bots. There are people that listen to them and that resonates.
Well, there are 36 million people who don't think that who believe the moon landing is fake. Like, yeah, these people are nuts. They are crazy. Everything they believe is wrong. They shouldn't be in charge of anything. I don't revoke. I mean, God.
So do you think we cater to crazy too much? Do you think we cater to crazy too much? One journalist,
Absolutely.
politician, or one citizen who just does something wacky, and then we try to evolve our whole system around that wacky idea or action or person?
Yeah, the idea that we should, I guess, again, this comes back to understanding economies of scale. Understanding what 5 million means in a nation of 360 some odd million people. Like knowing like we need to stop catering to the complete whack jobs and the lack of credibility of elite institutions, which we've talked about many times, contributes to this because when anybody says anything crazy, there's nobody credible who still has their credibility to raise their hand and say, no, like you're nuts and we don't have to listen to you.
Gotcha. Well, that's a great question. You have a follow-up, Jake, or are you good for today?
Well, I think something that America is dealing with that a good segment of the population doesn't really understand is we have populism that has been injected back into the political environment, and it's led by Donald Trump. But a lot of Americans are just saying, well, at least he fights, he's doing stuff for us. Okay, he does that by losing elections and causing good senators like Ben Sass and Mitt Romney to quit. I mean, I mean, Jonah Goldberg talks about this a lot. on the remnant, and he says Republicans are no longer concerned about winning. In most cases, it seems like they would rather lose an election because then they can say, well, I would have won if the system wasn't rigged against me. And so it's like we have a Republican Party that is at a civil war with itself. And then we have a Democratic Party that's dedicated to progressivism, and they're fighting a civil war because of, Palestine and Israel. Fictional political parties, while the world is teetering on the edge of World War III.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's not end with that. You're bumming me out, Jim.
Well, yeah, because it's like based on the idea that it's kind of like the national debt. Eventually, China will either get past this time of danger with China, or we won't. Like, it's who knows? Bart, would you?
Was that no? I was just laughing because I think you guys are making such good points, and I know I was not on here for like the first half hour of the discussion, but I don't want to end this whole discussion on kind of like a downer. I know Jake was going in that direction, and John was trying to pull him back. My problem is in terms of international affairs. Right now, I'm optimistic because I want to be optimistic. I want to be kind of optimistic about the world. It's really, really hard though, when okay, let's take an isolated, the situation going on right now in the Middle East. In order for the United States to have an impact on what's going on, we are negotiating through Arab countries that are not just not democracies, they are incredibly repressive governments, right? But yet we have to ally with them because, the other choices, I guess, are Russia. The litany is just, unfortunately, in my mind, and I don't want to end here on a downer, but the reality is, and I don't know, Professor, if you want to, what your views on this are, but most of the world right now doesn't think or adhere to a culture that's even close to ours. It is so far different from ours.
Except for all the people invading our southern border from all around the world.
But you know what? Those people want to come here. And I'm going to say something completely heretical. I think our immigration policy right now should be to let all of those people come in. And we should stop this stupid debate about the border security and an insurrection at the border. It's not an insurrection at the border. I mean, El Paso, Texas would not exist if the border wasn't there. It's the middle of a freaking desert where the average temperature is like 240 degrees. That's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? It's like, let's get real here. If people want to come here and contribute to our society and live here, and they want to be part of our culture, why not? Because if you look at
thanks for putting an exclamation point on my interjection. I still got you off point about the question about bad countries in the Middle East.
But I'll give Jake one more thing to look up. There was I want to say it came from Reason, or AEIR, but study of immigrants and crime over, I want to say it's like the last 170 years. And they have updated it every now and then, but it's like crime rates comparing immigrants to native citizens, and they updated it again last week. Did you find it yet, Jake? Do you know? No, maybe. Okay. I should have bookmarked this because I want to wait until he finds it, because the headline itself of the study is amazing.
Well, while you're waiting for that, can't you answer Bart's question on the Middle East and aligning with bad actors?
Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking about actually was in World War II, where we were allies with the Russians against Hitler, but we allowed the Russians to be allies with the Japanese in the Pacific. It's no, that's not it, Jake. It's not heritage. It's, I want to say either Reason or the American Economic, AEIR maybe. But yeah, so I was thinking about, we've done this in the past. You know, we've said we're allies in one region of the world, but we're enemies in another region of the world out of convenience. It's not pretty. And yeah, I guess people who are on the internet and want to be heroes and claim that anybody who disagrees with me is Satan will point out, you know, that we're not being pure or good enough when we make these alliances. But I always, I mean, I sometimes tell my classes, like, this is grown up stuff, you know, like, can we just set aside the childish point and deal with this like grown-ups? Because grown-ups understand that we're dealing with trade-offs here, and there are no good options. So anyone who thinks that there's a good option, you're a child, and you go off into the corner, and we'll stop talking to you. And you, by all means, like, you know, pat yourselves on the back for being heroes. Grown-ups have to make this decision, and it means that we're going to guess that we're doing the right thing on a 49-51 question, and we'll never know if we were right. Like, that's what policymakers and statesmen have to do every single day. Is you say, I think this is a 49-51 issue. I'm guessing that I'm right, but I'll never know.
Maturity requires tolerance towards ambiguity and uncertainty.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to look it up.
All right, we're going to end the show with Professor Tootle doing his own research live.
Yeah.
Oh, looks like Jake found it.
No, it's Cato.
Ah, okay, maybe not.
I think. But it was, I want to say it was like 170 years. Like, basically, yeah, for the last 170 years.
Did you find it?
Yeah, the mythical tie between, so it's a Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, but this is not the one I saw. But it's just basically like, for the last 170 years, people born in this country are much more likely to be criminals than immigrants. Like, basically, as far back as information goes, there has never been a time in American history when immigrants committed more crimes than natives, and it's never even been close. So immigrants are far more law-abiding than natives, and that's been that way since the 1870s or so. But
So,
I feel like that's not the study I saw. But
first, let me ask you, we'll look it up and tag it on later. Let's end with my final question in a short answer. We should listen to former President Trump and current President Biden, or we should be searching for some other answers regarding the Middle East and Taiwan and the immigration battle and what North Korea may do. I mean, it seems like there's some really scary things going on out in the world, and it doesn't seem like there's enough grown-ups. And I'm not accusing Biden and Trump of not being grown-ups, but it just seems like we're trying to solve the wrong problem, or we're looking for debate points, or maybe the American people are putting pressure. We're catering to all the crazy typists that put on Twitter or something. I don't quite understand why we're not engaging in a better way in 2024. So who are we supposed to listen to besides historians? I mean, where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to look for the grown-ups in the room? Cool, good piece of advice. What else?
that's a good question, because, to be honest, like, I sort of don't even know if we should listen to historians. And most of the people I know who are engaged in foreign policy stuff, like, the study of foreign policy is one of the most depressing and segmented areas of policy. I mean, when people go into it as a study, there's almost a complete disconnect between policy and history. Unlike anything else that we do. I mean, if you were to talk to an economist about how we should manage the US economy, and one of these upper like mucky mucks, they would have a sense of history. But when you talk to people who are the absolute mucky mucks when it comes to US foreign policy and decision making, it's like they know absolutely nothing. They know more about like, I shouldn't say absolutely nothing, but I'm shocked. And there was a book that came out a few years ago criticizing the institutional culture of the State Department by taking note of the fact that within the State Department, they have no institution, they have no processes for incorporating institutional knowledge. And so and he pointed this, I wish I could remember the name of this book.
I remember that book. Yeah, that was
but it was it was an interesting book because it pointed out that we send these groups of negotiators out, you know, and they're negotiating with the same people, and we're trying something that was tried 4 years earlier. But and the foreign dictator that we're dealing with is sort of shocked and saying, okay, we want to do this again. We lied to you and took your money 8 years ago, but this is now it's a different group of people who want to try it. I think that's it. Yeah, state of disrepair.
work.
Yeah. Anyway, so I would say like, and some of it has to do with how it's structured in academics, which I find absolutely frustrating. Part of it, and some of this has happened in history too, and political science, as diplomacy became its own thing, it became segmented. And as diplomatic history, as US universities canceled diplomatic history positions, they moved those things into an entirely new department. And killing political history meant that like, oh, well, we already have political science. Why do we need political history? We already have something called peace studies or diplomacy. Why do we need diplomatic history? And it means that these people who have been coming out of universities for the past 40 years, they know theory, but they don't know history. So
Is there
yeah, go ahead.
I've got your point, and let me see if there's one bright spot, and let me see if you agree with this, or maybe Professor Brasino has contradicted this premise. The military does a pretty good job of training military officers and probably NCOs. I just don't know. I was an officer of not just warfare. I mean,
that was the example in that book of the positive culture, because one of the things that Tom did right out of grad school was he would process these after action reports. Like he was literally the first draft of history. Like he was processing these reports of like, this is how this battle went down in Fallujah, because the military was like, we need to improve what we're doing right away. And they had an institutional interest in getting good history and information because they wanted to actually win the battle, not get another job. Like they were like, we want to live and we want to kill our enemies, so we need good information right away.
But holistic information. I remember reading Killer Angels about the Battle of Gettysburg as a second lieutenant in the Army. Why do I have to go back to the Civil War? Well, because it's the value of higher ground. So it tells you a novel about the importance and why am I supported space? Probably because
he took me on this walk with a bunch of, you know, colonels and I think there might have been some almost generals in there. I don't know. And I asked a bunch of these guys, because they were from every branch of the military. I said, you know, why are we out here in Gettysburg? You know, what are you getting out of this? And these are all combat veterans from either Afghanistan or a lot of them were combat veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq. And they were looking at that battlefield and they're like, because it's the same. You know, like we can process, oh, this is a drone, this is the ability of our aircraft. But like there are times when this battlefield is the same, and what the lessons that we learn are absolutely the lessons that translate into the battlefield. So, I mean, they were processing that information and remembering the battles that they had fought in Iraq and in Afghanistan, where they are commanding troops and moving people and learning from each other and from the Battle of Gettysburg.
Fascinating. I think we're going to end it on that today, Professor. I do have an ongoing frustration with our current political system, our debates, the way our parties select candidates, the way American citizens don't seem to be encouraged to think through deep issues. I mean, so it seems like there's all sorts of issues that concern, but foreign policy and the amount of money we spend on it. Sure, you say entitlement spending is 50% of the budget. It is. But a quarter of the budget, I think it's something like a quarter, is military spending. And are we spending it wisely? Maybe, probably. But we sure don't act like it. We sure don't seem to be proud of being an American and putting forth our flag and saying this is what this flag stands for. We end up arguing about all sorts of weird crap. I don't get it. I don't know what we're doing.
Well, the hard thing about military spending is getting back to Eisenhower, is like every shot that is fired, I'm sure Jake can find the speech, but the cost of a modern fighter is the cost of a schoolhouse. Like, violence is waste. Or as Sherman said, you cannot refine it. Like, this is military spending, you should just acknowledge, like, is a sinkhole. It's not like it is money we have to spend because the rest of the world isn't on board with the whole peace thing. But there's no way to sugarcoat that you are building something that is there to destroy. And therefore, the economic value of it is only the role that it plays to protect the parts of your economy that are actually based on peace. The only economic value of your military is when it protects peace. So
similar to the COP.
The Eisenhower Cross of Iron speech. Thanks, Jake. Yeah.
God, Jake, you're such an awesome asset, and we need to send you to the CIA or somebody that can use your instant talents. All right. Jake, thank you, Bart and Professor. This was an intriguing show for me, food for thought on how we can be good citizens with each other. So thank you.
Yeah.
Hope you have a great week.
Yeah, you guys, good to see y'all.
All right.
Easy.
Bye, guys.